Chapter 1: The Crown Prince's Awakening. The palace of Hansong stood as a testament to the grandeur of the Old Kingdom. Yet for Crown Prince Jiwan, the sprawling corridors, the gilded thrones, and the silken tapestries only highlighted the void in his life. Frail and sickly, his body had never matched the vitality of the throne he was meant to inherit. Even with the best physicians from across the land, nothing seemed to work. No herbal remedy, no elaborate spells could heal him. He was constantly tired, constantly weak, and perpetually trapped in a gilded cage. Jiwan had spent most of his life in the royal infirmary, drinking bitter potions and lying on a silk-covered bed while watching his younger siblings and the noble warriors practice their skills outside the palace. There was little joy in his life. Only the ever-present ache in his chest and the whispers of court advisors who doubted whether he could ever rule the kingdom. It was on a rainy night, when Jiwan was at his lowest, that an unusual visitor arrived. Dr. Han, a mysterious healer from the eastern provinces, known for his unconventional methods and magical knowledge, entered the palace under the pretense of offering a cure for the crown prince. Rumors of his healing powers had spread across the land, and many believed he was the last living master of the ancient healing arts. "Your Highness," Dr. Han said as he surveyed Jiwan's frail form, "you are not just sick. You are out of balance. Your internal energies are misaligned with the forces of life itself. To heal you, we must go beyond the body and into your spirit." Chapter 2: The Path of Healing. Dr. Han's treatment began immediately. He instructed Jiwan to undertake a series of exercises, breathing techniques, meditation, and an ancient form of acupuncture to unlock his blocked ki. At first it seemed to have no effect. But gradually, Jiwan began to feel changes within himself. He no longer fainted after standing for long periods. His limbs no longer trembled, and he could breathe more easily. There was a sense of clarity in his mind he had never experienced before. Dr. Han also introduced him to a new way of thinking about healing. It wasn't simply about curing illness, but about restoring balance to the body, mind, and spirit. "You, Your Highness, are meant to be a healer, not just a prince. Your strength is not in your bloodline, but in your connection to the natural world." Jiwan soon learned that Dr. Han's methods extended beyond herbal remedies. He taught him how to tap into the earth's vitality, drawing energy from the natural world around him. With each passing day, Jiwan's body grew stronger, and his understanding of the world deepened. He began to believe that his destiny was not just to rule from a throne, but to heal his people and protect the kingdom from the forces that sought to destroy it. Yet, while Jiwan's health was improving, the kingdom was facing external threats. Neighboring kingdoms were preparing for war, and whispers of a rebellion were stirring in the shadows. Jiwan knew that to save his people, he would need more than just medical knowledge. He would need strength, power, and perhaps an ancient artifact long thought to be lost to the annals of time. Chapter 3: The Prophecy of the Elixir. Jiwan's transformation was not unnoticed. As his health improved, rumors spread that the frail prince had somehow become stronger, more vibrant, and more knowledgeable in the ancient healing arts. The king, seeing his son's change, summoned Jiwan to discuss matters of state. During this meeting, Jiwan learned of an ancient prophecy that had been kept hidden by the royal court for centuries. The prophecy spoke of a rare artifact, the Elixir of Eternal Vitality, a powerful potion that could grant immortality and the ability to control the very forces of life. The elixir had been created by an ancient dynasty of alchemists, but it was believed to have been lost during a catastrophic event known as the Shattering. The elixir was said to be hidden deep within the Dungeon of Eldron, located in the forbidden dark forest of Eldron, a place no living soul had dared to enter in over 1,000 years. The king revealed that his own spies had discovered the existence of the elixir, and if Jiwan could retrieve it, he would not only secure his own health, but would also have the power to unify the fractured kingdoms and restore peace to the realm. With tensions rising across the borders and the kingdom on the brink of war, this quest became not just a journey of healing, but a mission to save the entire realm. Chapter 4: The Call to Adventure. With Dr. Han by his side, he set out with a small group of trusted companions, including General Baek, the kingdom's fiercest warrior, and his loyal bodyguard Lady Sora, a skilled archer. As they left the palace and entered the wilderness, Jiwon felt a deep connection to the land. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the forest appeared alive, as if it was aware of their presence. The further they traveled, the more Jiwon could feel the magic of the earth beneath his feet. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The group encountered many dangers on their journey. Rogue mercenaries from neighboring kingdoms sought to rob them, and bandits haunted the mountain passes. But it was the creatures of the dark forest that truly tested their resolve. Shadow beasts that could disappear into the mist, giant serpents with eyes like glowing embers, and enormous wolves that hunted in packs all tried to stop them. Yet Jiwon's newfound strength, combined with Dr. Han's healing arts, gave him the power to protect his group. As they delved deeper into the forest, they discovered hidden caves filled with ancient treasures and forgotten ruins where powerful artifacts lay buried beneath centuries of dust. The further they went, the more Jiwon realized that the dark forest was not just a physical place, it was a living entity, teeming with forgotten magic. Chapter 5. The Dungeon of Eldrin. There will be traps. Deadly ones, Jiwon nodded. He had no illusions about the danger they faced. The dungeon was built by the ancient alchemists, and it was said to contain not only physical traps, but also magical ones, illusions, curses, and even creatures made of pure energy. The moment they entered the dungeon, they were greeted by a chilling silence. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, depicting battles between ancient warriors and dark gods. The air was thick, with a sense of malevolent energy, and the temperature dropped as they descended deeper into the heart of the dungeon. The dungeon was a labyrinth, with twisting corridors that seemed to shift and change. There were traps at every turn, walls that closed in, spikes that shot from the floor, and pits that seemed to appear from nowhere. Yet it was not just the physical traps that threatened them. In the deeper chambers, they encountered spectral warriors, guardians of the dungeon, cursed to defend the elixir for all eternity. The battle was fierce. Lady Sora's arrows flew with deadly precision, General Baek's sword cleaved through the spectral warriors with each strike, and Dr. Han used his healing magic to protect them from the dungeon's curses. But it was Jiwon's ability to channel his ki that made the difference. With every step, he tapped into the energies of the dungeon, pushing back the magical forces that sought to overwhelm them. Finally, they reached the heart of the dungeon, a massive chamber where the elixir of eternal vitality rested upon a pedestal, bathed in a soft, golden light. But as Jiwon stepped forward to claim the elixir, the ground trembled, and from the shadows a massive serpent, a guardian of the elixir, emerged. Its scales were black as night, and its eyes glowed with an eerie light. Chapter 6. The Battle for the Elixir. The serpent reared up, its massive body coiling like a storm cloud, ready to strike. The air was thick with tension. Jiwon knew that the elixir would not come easily. The serpent was the ultimate guardian of the dungeon, a creature forged from dark magic to protect the elixir at all costs. "Stay back," General Baek shouted, raising his sword. "This is our fight." But the serpent's eyes blazed with a sinister glow as it unfurled its massive coiling body. Its scales, dark as obsidian, reflected the dim light of the dungeon, giving it an almost ethereal, otherworldly presence. It hissed, a deep and venomous sound that seemed to shake the very stone beneath their feet. The battle was upon them. General Baek was the first to spring into action, charging toward the serpent with his sword raised high. His powerful movements were like a blur of steel, each strike aimed at the beast's vulnerable joints. Yet, despite the precision and strength of his blows, the serpent's scales proved impervious. The sword bounced off, leaving behind no more than faint scratches on the creature's leathery hide. "Impressive," the serpent hissed, its voice vibrating through the chamber like a low rumble. "But you will not defeat me so easily." With a swift movement, the serpent lunged, its jaws opening wide as it aimed to swallow Baek whole. The general barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side just in time. The force of the attack created a gust of air that sent dust swirling through the chamber, blinding the group momentarily. Lady Sora quickly notched an arrow and loosed it, the sharp projectile sailing through the air with deadly accuracy. It struck the serpent's face, but the creature barely flinched. The arrow shattered against its scales like a twig. "We need to find its weak point," Sora shouted, already drawing another arrow. Jiwan, his heart pounding, stepped forward, feeling the pulse of the dungeon beneath his feet. He could sense the serpent's magic. Its life force was tied to the very essence of the dungeon itself. The elixir was protected not only by the serpent's brute strength, but also by the dark magic that imbued it. If they were to defeat this guardian, they would need to strike at the heart of its power. "Dr. Han!" Jiwan called out. "I need your help!" Dr. Han, who had been focusing on protecting the group with his healing magic, turned toward Jiwan. His face was grim. "The serpent is bound to the elixir by ancient magic. You must sever the connection. Only then can it be defeated." Jiwan nodded, the weight of the task settling over him like a heavy mantle. He closed his eyes, centering his mind, and reached deep within himself to tap into the vast reservoir of ki he had cultivated. His body hummed with energy, his senses sharpening, the air around him seeming to vibrate with power. He extended his hand toward the serpent, channeling his ki through the air, focusing it on the dark, malevolent energy binding the creature to the dungeon. The serpent let out a deafening roar, thrashing violently as if it sensed the prince's intent. "Stop him!" the serpent howled. "You do not understand the power you are meddling with." Jiwan gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with determination. He could feel the darkness of the serpent's magic pushing back against him, but he was resolute. "I will not let you harm my kingdom any longer." With a final, forceful push of chi, Jiwan unleashed a wave of energy that surged through the air and struck the serpent's core. The creature screamed in agony as the magic binding it to the dungeon fractured and broke. Its form wavered, flickering like a shadow, and for a moment it seemed as if it would dissolve into nothingness. But it wasn't over yet. With one last, defiant roar, the serpent launched itself at Jiwan, its massive jaws snapping shut. Time seemed to slow as the prince stood frozen, realizing he was too slow to dodge. But just as the serpent's jaws were about to close around him, a blinding light erupted from within the chamber. Dr. Han stepped forward, his arms outstretched, chanting an ancient incantation. The ground shook, and the air filled with a luminous, healing energy. The serpent froze mid-attack, leaving its body writhing in the light. The power of Dr. Han's magic severed the last threads of the serpent's life force, and with a final, deafening hiss, the creature crumbled into dust. The battle was over. Jiwan, breathing heavily, staggered back as the serpent's remains dissipated into the air. The chamber was still, the oppressive energy lifting as the guardian was vanquished. In the silence that followed, the group gathered around the pedestal where the elixir of eternal vitality rested. The vial, bathed in golden light, sat untouched, as if awaiting its rightful owner. Jiwan approached cautiously, his hands trembling as he reached for the elixir. As his fingers brushed against the glass, a surge of energy coursed through his body, filling him with a warmth and power he had never known before. The elixir was not just a cure, it was the key to unlocking his true potential. This is it," Jiwan whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The power to save my kingdom." Chapter 7. The Return to Hansongmen. With the elixir secured, the group made their way back through the labyrinthine corridors of the dungeon, the air still thick with the remnants of dark magic. The journey out of the dungeon was less perilous, now that the guardian was gone. The traps seemed to deactivate on their own, as if the dungeon was no longer trying to protect itself. But as they emerged from the depths of the forest, a new challenge awaited them. The winds had shifted, and the once peaceful lands surrounding Hansong were now tense with the threat of war. The neighboring kingdom of Harkon, a rival state to the south, had mobilized its forces and was preparing to march on Hansong. It was clear that the elixir's discovery had not gone unnoticed. Rumors of its power had spread like wildfire, and Harkon's king, Kaiser, a ruthless and power-hungry ruler, had dispatched his army to seize it. Jiwan's heart sank as he looked toward the horizon. His kingdom was on the brink of war, and now he had the power to change the course of history. But with great power came great responsibility. He knew he could not sit idly by and let his people suffer. The elixir could save him, but it could also be used to defeat his enemies. The question was, would he use its power for good or for conquest? The prince, now more confident and resolute than ever, turned to his companions. General Baek, Lady Sora, and Dr. Han stood beside him, their faces filled with determination. "We will return to Hansong," Jiwan declared, "and we will defend our kingdom. But more than that, we will heal the wounds of our land. We will unite the fractured kingdoms, not through war but through understanding. And I will not let Kaiser or anyone use the elixir for evil." Chapter 8. The Battle for Hansong. The journey back to Hansong was swift, but the closer they got to the capital, the more the tension in the air grew. The army of Harkon had crossed the border, and skirmishes were already breaking out along the frontiers. The kingdom was on the verge of collapse. Jiwan, with the elixir in hand, knew that time was running out. The kingdom needed a leader who could unite the people and lead them to victory. And though he had always been the frail, sickly prince, he now understood the true nature of his power. He was not just a ruler born of bloodlines. He was a healer, a protector, and a symbol of hope. But to prove that, he would have to fight. He would have to face Kaiser in a battle that would determine the fate of the realm. As the gates of Hansong came into view, Jiwan knew the real war was about to begin, one not just for the throne but for the future of the entire kingdom.
Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The armies of Hansong and Harkon clashed in the valley, just outside the city. Jiwan, clad in royal armor, stood on the battlements overlooking the battlefield, the elixir of eternal vitality hanging from his neck. His heart raced as the sound of clashing swords and war cries echoed in the distance. The time for diplomacy was over. He looked to General Baek, who nodded grimly, ready for the final battle. It's time, Your Highness, Baek said. We fight for Hansong. We fight for your people. Jiwan took a deep breath and raised his staff, his ki flowing through him like a tidal wave. The elixir's power coursed through his veins, amplifying his strength and focus. This is not just a battle for the throne, Jiwan said, his voice steady. This is a battle for the future of the world, and I will not let it fall into darkness. Pause. We have a choice to make. We find a way to make it so, but that, the crown prince of Hansong led his forces onto the battlefield, his heart filled with the knowledge that, no matter the outcome, he was more than just a sickly prince. He was a healer, a protector, and a force to be reckoned with. The battle for the kingdom had begun, and it would change the course of history forever.
Chapter 10. The Battle for Hansongong. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield as the armies of Hansongong and Harkon collided in a cacophony of war cries, clashing steel, and the thundering hooves of cavalry. The ground trembled beneath the might of the two forces, the very air alive with the tension of a kingdom on the brink of collapse. Jiwan stood at the forefront of his army, his armor gleaming in the fading sunlight, his heart resolute. In his hands, the staff he had crafted from the heartwood of the Eldrin tree hummed with the raw energy of the elixir. It was a gift and a responsibility. The power he now wielded wasn't just for himself, it was for his people, his kingdom, and for the future of the realm. As the battle raged around him, Jiwan's senses sharpened. He could feel the pulse of the battlefield, the life force of his soldiers and enemies alike. He had reached a new level, and he could now perceive every movement, every shift in the wind, and every attack before it was launched. His heightened perception allowed him to direct his forces with precise accuracy, using his newfound strength to shield his men and counter the Harkonian invaders. "General Baek," Jiwan called out, his voice steady amidst the chaos. The seasoned general, a towering figure in the thick of the fight, turned to him, his sword dripping with the blood of fallen Harkonian soldiers. "We need to press the advantage," Jiwan said, his gaze fixed on the enemy commander, Kaiser, who stood at the head of the Harkonian army like a looming specter, directing his forces with ruthless precision. Kaiser's black armor seemed to shimmer with an unnatural darkness, and Jiwan could feel the weight of his malevolent presence from across the field. Baek nodded. "We strike now. If we can break their center, we'll cripple their command. Ji-won clenched his staff, his heart pounding. This was the moment. He could feel the energy of the elixir flowing through him, but he had to be careful. The power was immense, and while it was healing, it also had the potential to corrupt if used recklessly. He had trained for this moment, not only as a healer, but as a leader who had to balance strength with wisdom. With a commanding gesture, Ji-won extended his staff forward, and a burst of light erupted from its tip. The blast, infused with his chi, struck the ground between the two armies, sending a shockwave that knocked Harkonian soldiers off their feet and disrupted their ranks. "Now, General!" Ji-won shouted. Baek, at the head of the charge, surged forward with his cavalry, cutting through the disoriented Harkonian forces like a blade through cloth. The Hansong soldiers rallied around him, their morale boosted by the sudden tide of the battle turning in their favor. But Kaiser was not easily deterred. He raised his hand, and with a chilling command, the ground beneath him cracked open, releasing a torrent of dark energy. The Harkonian forces, rejuvenated by this power, surged forward with renewed ferocity. "Foolish prince!" Kaiser's voice boomed across the battlefield, his words carrying a supernatural weight. "You think you can wield the elixir's power for good? You are as weak as the kingdom you defend. Watch as I bend your strength to my will." Kaiser raised his sword, a jagged black blade forged from the remnants of an ancient fallen star. He swung it through the air, and a wave of shadowy energy surged toward Ji-won, a dark torrent that threatened to swallow everything in its path. Ji-won's eyes widened as the energy neared, but just as the shadow engulfed him, a shimmering barrier of light erupted from his staff, the elixir's power responding to his will. The dark energy collided with the shield, sending a shockwave through the air. Ji-won could feel the elixir fighting against the corruption of Kaiser's magic, but the struggle was exhausting. He couldn't hold the barrier for long. Chapter 11. The Power Within. The battle raged on, but Ji-won's focus was consumed by his confrontation with Kaiser. His ki flared, and for a moment he felt the power of the elixir course through his veins, as though it were awakening something within him, something ancient and primal. He had only scratched the surface of its true potential. "Your Highness." Dr. Han's voice broke through his concentration, and Ji-won turned to see his healer and mentor charging toward him with Lady Sora close behind. Dr. Han's face was pale, his eyes filled with concern. "You are pushing yourself too hard," Dr. Han warned. "The elixir will not save you if you overextend yourself." But Ji-won shook his head, his gaze locked on Kaiser. "I must fight, Dr. Han. The elixir is the only way to save my kingdom from this madness." Without another word, Dr. Han stepped forward, his hands glowing with healing magic. He placed his palms against Ji-won's chest, his energy flowing into the prince's body, stabilizing him. "You are not just a prince, Ji-won. You are a healer. Don't forget who you truly are." A wave of clarity washed over Ji-won, and in that moment, he understood. The elixir's power wasn't about destruction, it was about restoration. To defeat Kaiser, he didn't need to fight with violence. He needed to heal the battlefield, to purge the darkness that had tainted it. "Thank you, Master," Ji-won whispered. He raised his staff once more, but this time, instead of a wave of destructive energy, he focused his ki inward, harnessing the healing power of the elixir. The ground beneath him trembled as a massive pulse of light erupted from his staff, spreading across the battlefield like a healing wave. The darkness that had plagued his army receded, and the fallen soldiers of Hanseong were lifted to their feet, their wounds closing and their energy restored. The Harkonian soldiers, however, were not immune. The dark magic that had bound them to Kaiser's will unraveled, and many of them dropped their weapons, confused and weakened by the sudden surge of restorative energy. Kaiser's eyes widened in disbelief. "No! No! You dare challenge me with healing?" Ji-won stood firm, his voice calm and resolute. "You cannot build an empire on death, Kaiser. This is the power of life. This is what will save my kingdom." The energy of the elixir surged through him, and in that instant, Ji-won knew what he had to do. He turned toward the heart of the battlefield, where Kaiser stood, surrounded by a swirling vortex of dark magic. With a final, determined gesture, Jiwon focused all of his ki into one singular focused point of energy. "Vitality rebirth!" Jiwon cried out. The light that erupted from his staff was blinding, a beacon of pure, untainted energy that pierced through the darkness of Kaiser's magic. The ground shook as the light expanded, overwhelming the dark energy with a tidal wave of healing. Kaiser's dark power shattered, and his form began to disintegrate, his black armor turning to dust in the wind. "No!" Kaiser screamed as his body disintegrated into ash, the remnants of his once mighty power vanishing with the wind. The battlefield fell silent. Jiwon stood, his breath heavy but steady. He had done it. Kaiser, the tyrant who sought to conquer the kingdom through dark magic and bloodshed, was no more. The elixir's power had purged the corruption from the land. But Jiwon knew this victory had come at a great cost. His body was drained, and he could feel the elixir's energy ebbing away as it returned to its natural balance. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. The war was over. The soldiers of Hansung cheered as their enemies fled or surrendered. The darkness that had threatened to engulf the kingdom had been vanquished, and for the first time in years, the people of Hansung felt hope return to their hearts. Jiwon stood atop a hill overlooking the battlefield. The ruins of the Harkonian forces scattered before him. Beside him, General Ba, Lady Sora, and Dr. Han stood in silent admiration. The elixir's power had saved them, but it was Jiwon's wisdom and courage that had led them to victory. "You did it, Your Highness," Lady Sora said, her voice filled with pride. "You've saved us all." Jiwon smiled weakly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We've only just begun. There is much to rebuild, much to heal. But I know now that it's not just my kingdom that needs healing. The world is fractured, and the elixir is only one part of the puzzle." Dr. Han nodded. "The elixir has given you the strength to protect your people, but the true path lies ahead of you. You must bring balance, not just to Hansung, but to all the kingdoms." Jiwon turned to face his friends and allies. His mind was filled with a sense of purpose, a deep understanding that the journey he had begun was far from over. The elixir had granted him strength, but the true test would be in how he wielded that strength to heal the world. "I am no longer just a prince," Jiwon said, his voice steady. "I am a healer, and I will restore what has been broken. Together, we will bring peace to this world." The winds shifted, carrying with them a new sense of hope, and so Jiwon's journey continued. Chapter 13. The Road Ahead. The streets of Hansung were bustling with life once more, and the air, once thick with the tension of war, had cleared. People were beginning to rebuild their homes, their shops, and their lives. The kingdom had emerged victorious, but Jiwon knew that the real challenge lay ahead: reconciliation, rebuilding, and restoring peace to a fractured world. The elixir, while a powerful symbol of hope, was not a cure-all. The battle with Kaiser had proven that, and Jiwon understood that the true strength of his kingdom and of his reign would come not from the elixir alone, but from the unity of his people. He stood on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the city. His thoughts were interrupted by the familiar footsteps of General Beck, Lady Sora, and Dr. Han, who approached him with grave expressions. "Your Highness," General Beck began, "there is news. King Ryu of the Kingdom of Kajan has called for a council. He seeks a meeting with you." Jiwon turned to face them, his brow furrowed. Kajan was a powerful kingdom to the east, known for its military strength and vast resources, but it was also a land steeped in ancient traditions and rivalry. If King Ryu was calling for a council, it could mean two things. Either he saw an alliance, or he was preparing for further conflict. "Tell me more," Jiwon said, his voice calm but steady. Beck nodded. "There have been rumors of unrest among the kingdoms, especially with the fall of Kaiser. It is said that other leaders are watching you closely. If they see Hansung as weak, they may seek to take advantage of the situation." Jiwon's mind raced. He had always known that the balance of power in the realm was delicate, but now more than ever he had to be careful. The elixir had given him strength, but it also made him a target. It was not just his kingdom that needed protection. The very idea of peace was at risk. "I will go," Jiwon said after a moment of reflection. "But I will go on my terms. This council will not be about power. It will be about healing. Dr. Han gave him a long, thoughtful look. Healing. It will be difficult, Jiwon. The scars of war run deep. I know, Jiwon replied. But the only way forward is together. Chapter 14. The Council of Kingdoms. The journey to Qijan was long, and the air grew cooler as the prince and his party ventured eastward. As they entered the capital, Xi'an, the grandeur of the city became evident. Towers of marble and gold pierced the sky, and the streets were lined with lush gardens and monuments to the kingdom's glory. It was a city built for conquest, for power. But Jiwon was determined to make it a city of peace. The council hall, a massive structure adorned with intricate carvings and banners of Keihan's royal family, was filled with representatives from every major kingdom. Jiwon's arrival caused a stir, as many of the leaders were still unsure of his true intentions. Some regarded him with respect for his victory over Kaiser, while others eyed him with suspicion, wondering if he was just another ambitious ruler seeking to extend his influence. At the center of the room sat King Ryu, a tall, imposing figure with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul. His black armor gleamed like a shadow in the torchlight, and his posture exuded authority. Beside him stood his most trusted advisor, Lady Yara, a brilliant strategist known for her cunning and intellect. "Welcome, Prince Jiwon," King Ryu said, his voice deep and commanding. "I am honored to have you here. The kingdoms are watching and they have questions. We need to know what your intentions are and what role Hansong will play in the future of this continent." Jiwon stood tall, his heart steady. He had faced battles, had healed wounds, but this was perhaps the most important moment of his life. The fate of his people and the world was at stake. "I come not to wield power," Jiwon began, his voice clear and unwavering. "I come to heal, to unite. The days of conquest and war must end. We have all suffered, and if we continue to fight among ourselves, there will be nothing left to rule. Hansung stands ready to forge a new path, one of peace, cooperation, and restoration." A murmur rippled through the council. Some looked skeptical, others intrigued. But it was Lady Yara who spoke next, her voice like a knife. "Do you truly think you can convince us to abandon centuries of rivalry? What makes you different from the rulers who came before you? The elixir may have healed your kingdom, but it cannot heal the wounds of our people. Your vision may sound noble, but it is naive." Jiwon's eyes met hers and he smiled softly. "Perhaps, but I believe in the power of life, of healing. My kingdom's strength comes not from conquest, but from the belief that we are all connected. Every kingdom, every person. We share this world, and it is up to us to decide what kind of future we want." There was a long silence, and then, one by one, the leaders began to speak. Chapter 15. King Ryu, who had once been skeptical, was the first to extend a hand of friendship. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your vision, Prince Jiwon," he said, his voice softer than it had been when they first met. "Let us begin anew, together." The council declared that a new era had dawned, a time of peace, of rebuilding. Hansong, Keijan, and the other kingdoms would form a council of their own, a coalition dedicated to preserving harmony across the continent. But even as the peace was being forged, a shadow lingered over the horizon. Chapter 16. The Last Test. Jiwon, now fully realizing the burden of leadership, gathered his closest allies once more. "We cannot let this new peace falter," he said, his voice firm. "But we cannot fight them the way we fought Kaiser. This must be a battle of healing, not destruction." Lady Sora spoke up, her voice unwavering. "We will not abandon this peace, Your Highness. We will fight. But we will fight for the future we've just begun to build." General Baekha Keada, ever the tactician, agreed. "We will need a coordinated defense, but we must also prepare to engage in diplomacy. We'll need to show them that the world has changed." The final battle against the Scourge was not one of bloodshed, but of strategy and diplomacy. Jiwon led his forces to the northern frontiers, where the Scourge awaited. But instead of charging into battle, he used his power to heal the land around the nomads, to show them the strength that came from unity, not destruction. The Scourge leader, a man known as Kor, met Jiwon face to face. He was grizzled and hardened by years of war, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of a deep sorrow. "What do you want from us, Prince?" Kor growled. "We are a people born of war. It is all we know." Jiwon extended his hand, his staff glowing with the soft light of healing. "I do not ask you to abandon who you are, but I ask you to see what is possible when we come together. We are all people of this world. The cycle of war has torn us all apart. It is time for something new." For hours they spoke, not of war, but of the world they could build together. And in the end, Kor lowered his weapon. Perhaps there is more to life than endless fighting. The Scourge withdrew, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of the new world Jiwon had created. Epilogue: The New Dawn. Jiwon had envisioned began to take shape. The kingdoms, once fractured and torn by war, flourished under the guidance of a new council, one formed not from greed and rivalry, but from mutual respect and cooperation. The elixir, though no longer needed to heal Jiwon's body, remained a symbol of the new era. Jiwon stood on the balcony once more, overlooking the kingdom of Hansong. The people were rebuilding, not just their homes but their hearts. The scars of war were healing, slowly but surely. He had not only saved his kingdom, but the entire world. The prince who had once been frail and sickly was now a king, not of power, but of healing.